inside of game chats, you will always have to set up a push to talk. Push to talk serves a few purposes for me. It's like raising your hand, so I know to call on you if you're not getting a chance to speak. And then the second thing is I never have to hear you sneeze or cough. So I think Born Wild is Madeline? Or Maddie? That shouldn't be a problem at all, Maddie. A lot of the start here will actually be just me kind of talking over a bunch of stuff before we kind of throw it to a more group-related thing. And I feel like Skid just joined. I wanted to say that it was Will, but I feel like I've got that wrong, that maybe I don't have the interview template set up for Skid yet. Oh no, okay. Eric, I got you. Oh, good. If you don't have much experience with Discord, to set up the push to talk, you just go to your user settings. It's a little cog in the bottom left of the screen. You'll see your name, a microphone, a set of headsets, and then the cog. Inside of voice and video, roughly halfway down the screen, you'll see the voice and video where you can set up a push to talk. If you're doing it on a phone, I feel like I saw you were on the phone. Yeah, doing it on the phone, I don't have much experience. My phone is pretty old and struggles to do any modern apps. So I don't know too much. And then if you set things up on your computer, you end up having to have Discord installed. So those are two little things there. But in the long run, again, this isn't necessarily as important now, but it is kind of the first thought that I have. I do want everybody to recognize that Meeseeks is named right-click for volume. I currently have Meeseeks muted, but I will pretty much always have some sort of music kind of playing in the background, and you can right-click anybody to adjust their volume so you can hear. There are definitely people who speak lower than others, whose mics pick up lower than others, and then I'm pretty sure if you had Meeseeks at normal volume, you're probably getting blasted by music. So those are things to keep in mind, that you can right-click anybody's name inside of the voice chat to adjust their volume. So as we kind of get into things, the general, like realistically, Discord is our game. Everything we need to play is voice. I enjoy theater of the mind. I will create maps, and I will have maps that end up being our virtual tabletop. But in the long run, Discord and what we're kind of working with here, the actual communication, is the biggest thing that we can't lose. Oh, is it only muted for me right now? How about that? Server mute? That might mute it for everybody. No, you're good. But I feel like the phone users were the reasons I didn't actually switch it back, because I imagine it's not terribly easy to adjust Meeseeks volume. But I will say, in the long run, I don't want you to just mute Meeseeks. The music that I play, possibly more based on what campaigns we end up choosing to play. The music is my way of kind of controlling, like, subtly how we all feel and how tension can build. In general, I like to suggest that you take the music and you turn it down just past where you can hear it. And that way, your brain is still picking up the music, but it's not necessarily something that you're listening to. And it makes a big difference to have that kind of background there. Is that better now, Maddie? Once I switch it to the server wide, I feel like that would make sense. Excellent. Good to hear. So some of the other things that are pertinent about what we have going on in Discord, in the actual Order of the Storm chat, the one that's all lowercase, like right now we're in the voice chat. Up above us, there's an Order of the Storm, which is the text chat. That will have some pinned content. If anybody is new to Discord, essentially in the very center of Discord in that chat, it will say Order of the Storm. You'll see the bell, you'll see a little push pin, and then a little human character. That push pin will just take you to anything that I have pinned. Those will be resources that are important to the actual game's chat. I believe everybody that we have in here I think we might be missing one person in the actual Roll20 right now. No, the 5 of us are there, or the 5 of you are there. So the Roll20 is one of those links. D&D Beyond is the other link, and then the actual PayPal link to send money for pay-to-play games, which is every game after Session 0. So those are the 3 pertinent links that are specific to this game. Another spot to check for links inside of Discord ends up being right below the welcome chat, and that is the D&D resources. That will link you to things like the Beyond 20s, which are pertinent whether you use Google Chrome or whether you use Firefox, and then like my Google Drive, that gives a lot of different resources, as well as things like any surveys that I send out are on that Google Drive. And among them, something that we will treat with later, but I do have what is called like the RPG consent form. And while most of the things on that are not even pertinent to my games, by and large, what that's trying to get across is that there are topics that we won't discuss. There are topics that may come up, and there has to be an understanding of how we can kind of move past things. That I may describe gore in a way that is uncomfortable to somebody, and then in the long run, if I recognize that, it can be everything from like just typing an X in a chat or sending a private message to me, just move on. Those kind of things are the things that I am willing to do, but I don't always know what to skip over. Me personally, I have no problem describing stuff that some people don't necessarily want to hear about. Violence to anything, in my opinion, is on the table. I understand that a lot of people don't necessarily want violence done to animals, pets, or younger NPCs. But in my opinion, part of the violence of the Middle Ages was the fact that everything dies, and often it's quite horrendous deaths. So there's that little survey that's called the RPG consent form, and that's something that if you do want to take a look and kind of note different things that you might not want to experience. The biggest thing, I think, is to fill it out. But also to find some level of comfort where you can actually speak with me so we can actually determine from there as well. I understand it doesn't necessarily have to be voice chat. I think that can often make those things more difficult, but it can be like a text chat. But in general, I keep that as a whole survey. So to me, it's more that I see a few people who have this or that opinion, but it doesn't necessarily tell me which games that they might be in. So I kind of adjust everything kind of based on the general consensus. And without being too, mean about it, there's some interesting like phobias on there, and thirst is one of those things that I would never think that dying of thirst is something that I shouldn't talk about, but there are actually people who game on my server who don't really want to deal with that. And those are the type of things where I am most likely to forget that I'm not supposed to discuss this, or it's not supposed to be a thing that we like focus on in game. And that's where the communication between us kind of has to sit, where somebody's like, can we move on from this? And it can be, like I said, it's very easy in person to have like an X card on the table where somebody just taps the X card and I can see that physical movement as you reach for this thing. And it just means subtly. Let's move on. Let's fade to black and move away from it. So those are the big things about Discord. If anybody has any questions Discord related, please don't hesitate to ask. But before we move on from Discord, does anybody have any questions about the use of Discord at this point? Excellent. So that, you got a thought, Justin? So that's our main communication resource. The next thing that we're going to talk about is D&D Beyond. That link, again, is inside of Discord. If anybody has not joined that, right now, I feel like I've got 3 people. I'm not entirely sure if Cringing is one of us, so we may still be missing. I think actually from this group, I think we have 1 of the 5 that are here. But by and large, before we actually get into character creation, I would say it behooves you to join my account or join this campaign, because that allows you access to all of the books that I've purchased on D&D Beyond. That's one of the biggest resources, is essentially that sharing of content. It will give you access to the books under their resources tab, as well as give you access to everything under the actual character creation. So that is one of the big things there. When we get into character creations, I do want to go over some of the things that I want your character set up and prepared with. Has everyone created a character on D&D Beyond in the past? Or I guess, has anybody not? I've got you with Brawl created. Did you have anything that you had questions about when you created him? Yeah, in the long run, if you don't have characters made, I like for people to have characters in mind. Part of, for me, when I realized that I should really jump deeper into dungeon mastering, was actually that I had a list. Well, actually, I had printouts of approximately 30-something characters that I had created and not gotten a chance to play. So I was actually like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to start DMing. I've always known that I would be the DM with my friends, like, in real life, but there was no reason not to just dive into DMing. And I think that's one of those things that you kind of start to notice is creating a lot of characters. It ends up being a very good way to create NPCs. So I do want to jump in real quick. If everybody can click on the actual voice chat, Order of the Storm, and I understand 2 of you are on your phones. I'm not sure if you can really view my screen while you're watching on your phones. But if we can click into that, I'm just going to do a quick process of a character creation, because I do want to show some settings that I want all characters to kind of have, and we'll possibly change some of that as we move in. So let's give everybody a moment to pop into the actual channel, and you should be able to view my screen. So assuming everybody is all set there, if you click the link, it'll take you to a screen like this. I think the first thing that it would do is actually ask you if you want to create a character in it or join with a character that you already have. But essentially past that screen, you would get to this one. I can't really show you that screen because it's my campaign. But creating a character, oops, holding shift takes it to a new screen. So creating a character takes you to the first of those screens, which is the home screen. And this is where I want to actually show things. So I'm just going to randomize the names. So my character is going to be Orman. I want everybody to have homebrew content created or activated. I like to make very particular things based on the narrative of the story to give to players. But all of those other settings, I do not care for them to be on. It can be something that we might discuss towards the end of this and decide that we will play forward with. But in the long run, Critical Role content, Magic the Gathering content, and Eberron content, we can discuss. Not going to be using any playtest and not going to be using any non-core content in the long run. Dice rolling is kind of a choice for you. I find that D&D Beyond has a lot of errors with their actual dice rollers, so I prefer to avoid it. Optional class features and customize origin, we can discuss those things. As far as I know, you can't actually turn those things off, or maybe just having it toggled off as I have it is allowing them. So maybe the opposite turns it off, but we can kind of discuss those things. I do want everything set to milestone, and that's essentially I will just tell you all when you level. I don't think it's a whole lot different than if I gave you XP in the long run, because I make up XP for social encounters. We are going to switch from fixed hit points to manual hit points, and that will include your first level, and we will re-roll the first one that you would roll every single time you level. And that will give a lot more varied hit point totals. You probably will find that the rolls even out over time, but taking the average is always better because it rounds that 4.5 up to a 5. So it's always one extra hit point than an average. And Justin can attest to the fact that sometimes you've got a medium high level character who has next to no hit points. Yeah, you have half as many hit points as most of the rest of the party. And it sucks because you are the front of the party. You are always at the forefront, and they are always throwing you into situations like, hey, Justin, go over there and explore. You guys know I could take half as much as you, right? So it's pretty wonderful. Makes for a very interesting character, though. I think he's been a whole lot of fun. So we're going to have the manual hit points there. We're going to have feats turned on, multi-class turned on, and scaled level spells turned on. Basically, that just means we are using feats. We are using multi-class, but you do have to meet the requirements to make that happen. And then the show scaled level spells basically lets you, if you've got a level 1 spell that you can upcast, once you get that spell slot, it will show you a highlighted version in blue that you can see. We'll use encumbrance, and and coin weight should be turned off. So those are the big ones. If anybody ends up with any questions, we can always go over them again, or I can always just set it on your characters. But if you have any thoughts on why I do these things, I can always answer them. Encumbrance is probably the biggest one that I like to remind people that strength is the thing that allows you to carry everything that you might want to carry. If you throw away the use of encumbrance, it very quickly gimps the reason that you would use strength, because strength is good for fighting classes, but it's also one of those things that, like, if you want to carry everything under the sun, you've got to have strength. I did not catch that, Beaks. What were you thinking? Having it turned off means that you count the coin weight. If it's red, that means it's ignoring, and I do not want to ignore coin weight. Essentially, when I give out coin, that's when it matters the most. Usually, if you go to a town, I have no problem with you changing out coins. But that's one of those things where it will matter more in an exploration campaign than it will in a campaign that, like, every single night you're back in town. But the biggest reason why I like coin weight to be important is if I give you 45,000 coin, you're not taking all of that out of a dungeon. And yep, and that's one of the things, like, a bag of holding, they're limited to how much weight they can carry. It's one of those things where I like a certain level of realism. I understand that people want to do crazy, sweet, magical stuff in this game, but at the same time, there are things that limit items for a purpose. Like, a backpack only carries 50 pounds of gear, and it comes with 50 pounds of gear in it. So the moment you get a backpack, like as a starting adventurer, that thing's already full. Any more weight, and it technically should break. So again, we'll talk about races a little bit later, but predominantly my world is a very human world. Almost every other race that you are going to encounter is going to be a rarity. And my point of kind of bringing that up is pretty much anybody who's non-human is going to have some sort of social encounter difference to just like a human walking into town. People will eventually notice those differences about you. And if they are not somebody who likes you as an ally who you've essentially helped, you may find them as somebody who is trying to sabotage your ideas, somebody who becomes even more of an enemy, somebody who has something against you because of something that's happened in there. There's a lot of things that can kind of boil down from having a different background. I'm not saying you can't use them, but we will discuss the other races as a group, what people want to play with. Justin's in my all human campaign. Honestly, all human is my favorite thing because that's how I view the world. Is they've encountered what? I think you guys have encountered like 3 dwarves from level 1 through 6. No, 4 dwarves. I don't think they've even come across an elf yet. To me, it's a lot of fun to have a world where these mythical creatures and these races exist. Finding them, searching for them, and potentially allying yourself with them is a choice that the group can move forward with. And effectively, once you get to a point, like they've done a lot to help those dwarves, and they now have the ability that if somebody dies or if somebody comes into the campaign, effectively somebody can start from that background of the dwarves that they've helped and can create a dwarf. But that's one of the things that I think of it as kind of Tolkien-esque about how I like to set the world, but those mythical races are there. They're just odd, and people will look at you as weird. So we'll kind of get a little bit more into that, but I was just setting the actual race information. So ability scores is something that we will deal with shortly here. I like to do point buy. I like that because you can buy standard array and it gives you a little bit of an ability to min-max. I find low stats are the funny ones. The funny stuff that you do where you fail stuff is often what we will remember the most of, and it creates the best like inside jokes, which is I think what really happens like as you bond together a group in D&D. So that's what I usually fall back to. I have been testing and I kind of like the idea that, what do we have right now? 5 people. Rolling for 7 stats. Basically, each person would roll 4 dice and drop the lowest, and we will keep the 5 highest and then the lowest. And that will be everybody's stat block. That's the other option, but we will talk about that a little bit more as people kind of want to decide there. My favorite place to play is 1 through 5. That is something that we will discuss as the group to decide what kind of campaign everybody is looking forward to. But by and large, I like 1 through 5. It's when you learn the most of your character. It's when you become effectively a full-fledged character of that class is at 5th level. I am not a big fan of starting at the higher levels. And as well, 5th edition really starts to break down as you get close to the teens. And that's where I have a feeling most campaigns will always end, is by the time people get so god-awful powerful that it's just like many hours of combat, and often like it can easily be like 40 minutes to an hour per turn. So in general, I would say we're probably going to start at level 1. And then we'll more than likely start with base equipment as well. I think realistically wizards are the only one that it can kind of be viable to go with the gold as far as starting goes. but I did want to take a moment to kind of look over some of the spells. But D&D Beyond, part of what it gives us is your stat block will be up top. If I call for an intelligence roll, you can just scroll over it and click any of the dice that it shows you. Anything in a red outline is usually roll to the virtual tabletop. So like I can scroll over control flames. My shift button is what changes the dice to green. But when you roll over control flames, that's casting it. And then the other option is it then also has a display in the virtual tabletop that will share the actual spells like wording for me if I ever ask for it as the DM. And of course, Control Flames doesn't actually have a spell, so the first one did it as well. So my apologies there. I could have picked a better cantrip. But that's kind of the basic gist. Roll20 gives you access to saving throws, which is the same thing. Click the red die. It's going to roll the saving throw on the virtual tabletop. For initiative, you basically select your token and then click the red die. It'll roll it on the virtual tabletop. So a lot of those, yeah, I didn't have the combat tracker up yet, but a lot of those things are pretty simple. But those are the kind of things, if you end up with questions, please never hesitate to ask. I think those are the big things for D&D Beyond, but does anybody have any questions after that initial kind of run through on D&D Beyond? What do you got, Ben? Right now, we're going to skip over that. I just want to go through this portion of it as fast as possible, and then we're actually going to take it into, I want the group to actually decide. I wanted to put it forward early because I wanted people to start thinking about it on some level, whether they want to roll or whether they want to take something that's more solid that you can decide and alter yourselves. But in general, part of why I like to do it like that is I don't want roles to be individualized. That is not an option. We are either going to do point buy, where people can have their individualized stats, but effectively have those 27 points, or we are going to do a group roll where everybody has the same stats, but they can choose like where they want to place them based on what character they go for. But that's to prevent somebody who rolls like all 8s and somebody who rolls 4 18s. That I'm going to get to once we actually do the Beyond 20. So inside of Roll20, that's our next thing. Everybody's already here right now. This is our virtual tabletop. When I present maps, this is where we're going to see them. Eventually, once we have character tokens, they are going to be in this lower left-hand side under that little sheet of the Order of the Storm. And that's basically going to be just like a version of your token will always sit there. For me, it's a place where I can copy and paste them onto whatever map that we're on. But the other option is, I don't think I have anybody here, but like if Torch was one of your characters, because it is essentially a character token to have a torch that's droppable, it just means that you can scroll over the torch, and if you grab its name, you can then drag it out onto the map. I don't think I can do it with shift. Okay, there it is. And it will drop onto the actual map. Once you select it, I don't know why I can't move it right now if it's lagging. But you can move around with your arrow keys. You can move around by dragging and dropping yourself. But by and large, once you have your character token, you can also drop yourself onto the map. But often I will try to cover that. I would say, just as a small thing, in the long run, the more stuff you all are prepared to do that I don't have to do for you is the kind of stuff that helps the DM out. Because I will have no shortage of things to do. I often have people, the moment I start combat, they're like, is something wrong? Is Discord broken? And I'm like, nope, I just have to control 20 creatures, so we're going to have to sit here in silence for a while I manage everything. So there's a lot of stuff like that where in the long run, being prepared for us to share as much of the actual duties can speed the game up. There's a certain amount that can't be helped, but by and large, like there's certain times where you'll kind of have to figure out, like, it's probably going to be a dead silence when we start a combat because I'm trying to get through stuff instead of filling dead air. And then the only other big thing that I wanted to share with Roll20, and of course this is the wrong game, is actually that not even sure offhand, but basically when you take a look at the time, part of what I like about Roll20 is it will tell you the proper time in your time zone. So if I schedule a game for 3 EDT, I'm trying to think who it was who's in New Zealand, and it's just not coming to mind offhand. I want to say it's Notorious. No, wait, he's at Disney. But regardless, basically, checking Roll20 is the best place to find out when something is scheduled for. If we have a game, I would say with 99% certainty, I'm going to have it scheduled on Roll20. I try to do reminders on Discord an hour ahead of time. I usually throw myself in chat and I have Meeseeks playing music for me. And that's just kind of like a waiting period as I start to set up my computer for the game. So I'm not necessarily like free to entertain you if you come in, but it's perfectly fine to come in and basically sit idle. And I may be able to talk to you. So that's kind of a random thought, but checking times, Roll20 is the place to do. But I try to do messages into the chat the night before, or at some point the day before, about an hour before, and I've gotten more into trying to do like 15 minutes or 10 minutes before games as well. And then I almost always do like a final call, which is roughly the last like 5 minutes, plus or minus at the start time, basically. So those are the big 3 resources: our communication, our characters, and our virtual tabletop. Any questions about Roll20? So, I mentioned in Discord that we have the links to Beyond 20, and that is a place for us to link Roll20 and D&D Beyond. All of those roles that I was sending to the virtual tabletop were using Beyond 20. So on any given time you have any of your extensions under the little, I have Google Chrome, under the little puzzle piece in the top right, I always have it set so you can see Beyond 20, but basically if you click that red die, you can see a short little small option. If you right click, you can see a different drop down. Either way, going to the options will bring up a full list of options that you can modify. Among those, I think it's best to have it set Never Whisper. I'd like for people to always roll twice. That way is if you roll faster than I can think and I'm trying to say roll with advantage or roll with disadvantage, 2 dice are already rolled. And then the other big one is auto roll damage and crits. That just means if it rolls a 20, it's going to also roll the extra dice that would go with the 20. And while it doesn't save a lot of time, saving moments of time, I think, is some of the biggest stuff that you may not see it in real time, but it adds a lot of game time that we can actually be playing when we're not waiting for somebody to roll. I have players who don't follow this idea, and I swear I can Event Horizon scratch my eyes out while they roll to hit, and then I have to sit there with dead air while I wait for them to roll the damage. It's just one of those things that it speeds up a lot by having always roll twice and auto roll damage and crits. But that's one way to access Beyond 20. That little red die will also sync you to the virtual tabletop and make sure that your rolls are going to it. But one of the other places that you can find that bee is actually on the virtual tabletop in the lower right hand, and it's the exact same thing. If you just click it with your left click, that's just going to sync your character to this tabletop, and then if you right click it, you can get options. And it's the same type of thing. It'll give you a few of the options to always roll twice, but the more options is where you can actually roll or have it set to auto roll damage and crits. And again, those are the big ones. It's not necessarily important about the other ones. You can kind of choose those things. Something like add tiebreaker, in my opinion, I like to see that, because if you roll a 3 and have 14 dexterity, it's going to call your initiative 3.14, and that way if I have a monster that rolls a 3, I don't have to ask you your dexterity and basically give away that I have a monster fighting on the same initiative round as you. The first round of initiative, I like the monsters to not be on the initiative order, because I don't want people to know to expect something is going to fight at any given point. But that's Beyond 20. Any questions about the Beyond 20 extension? So those are the mechanics of how my games work. Those are the big 4 things that we will all be using and are essentially necessary to the play. The next things we kind of get into is effectively what I consider our social contract. And then we'll do some more discussion about that towards the end here as we get into the idea of if anybody has anything else they would like to add. But for now, communication is the keystone of Dungeons and Dragons. Right now, I am a huge physical communicator. Seeing people's faces, seeing people's body language is massive for me. We don't get that here. In the long run, though, that's one of those things where, because we are limited to just our voices and what we will type, we have to communicate as much as possible. When there are issues, when there are arguments, when there is bad blood in D&D, it is because people are not communicating. If you start to have issues thinking that I am being your enemy, I need you to tell me that. If you are having issues where you don't like a topic that is being dealt with, I need you to tell me that. There's a lot of things that just communicating about things is a great way to solve problems. And with that in mind, also, the communication comes in that it doesn't even have to be related to a problem, because if the party is not communicating with me about what they would like to do, you essentially often will force one person to make all of the decisions, and then that person tends to feel bad when somebody else is actually participating. They go silent to let somebody else participate, and all of a sudden it turns into this person has to deal with all of the issues with the party, and then they never get to participate in like deciding what happens with, say, a combat. But that's one of those things where a regular, active, communicating party is clutch. I don't want to tell you all a story. I want to describe the setting to you and then let you all ask questions, tell me what you would like to do, and be creative about where we go with it. Because effectively, and this will kind of repeat a little bit, effectively, I like to create the setting, and then the moment we sit down in the session, you all will be writing the story, and I kind of referee some of the situations that will kind of play out. But that's communication. It's got to be the center focus of how we interact together. And with that, player fun, I want all of you to treat each other with respect and as if you are friends, even if we go for the minimum kind of time frame of like 4 to 6 months of a beginner campaign. You all are going to become friends in this session, or you're not going to last in the session. I don't think you can play D&D with people for months on end on a weekly basis and not become friends. So please start off by treating people with respect and as if they were your friends, because you might find out that you have friends all over the world now. As far as my setting goes, I play very grim dark. A lot of things to me about DMing is creating situations where your resources deplete to make stuff that should be easy difficult, or I throw big stuff at you that you probably have to either run away from or throw everything that you have against it. A lot of the NPCs that you encounter are solely worried about living. They don't really have the luxury of a lot of like downtime, enjoyment, casual things that you might do. You might find people in the tavern, but you're just as likely to find people who are running like their armor stand, and when they have free time, they are sleeping. Like if you're trying to flirt with my NPCs, I'm probably going to have an NPC who's extremely busy because I don't necessarily want to do any sort of romance with you. And with that in mind, if players want to be romantic with each other, we can kind of find time for that. But by and large, I would say talk to the other person as well, because otherwise you may find them just spurring your advances. The one place where I take player agency away is that your character must have a reason to be an adventurer, that they want to go out and adventure, and they must have a reason to adventure with this party. The moment your character has a reason to not adventure, they're going to become an NPC. The moment your character has a reason to not adventure with the party, they're going to become an NPC. And at that point, you basically have the choice to create a character who fits those two rules, or you're probably leaving the campaign. I'm not going to entertain long bouts of 5 people are doing this and 1 person is sitting back in town fishing. You're not going to screw over the party by being some sort of anti-hero while they are heroes. If you make an evil character, that is perfectly fine, but they are evil while they are working with the characters. They are not screwing over the other adventurers. They can do their evil designs with the party. And if at any point the party finds out and has an issue with it, you might find yourself creating a new character as your character becomes an NPC. That's really up to you all as players and adventurers, how you want to deal with stuff like that. And that also rides a fine line of there shouldn't be secrets between you as players. All of you should be able to share the inside jokes, essentially, of like 5 of you have really good people as your adventurers, and the other one is evil, doing crazy evil stuff, but like the characters don't know, but you, the players, should always know. There shouldn't be any laughable jokes about the other players. And that's one of the things. Often I will tell different people information, and it is assumed that at some point you share that information. If you are not in combat, you can pretty much share it right then. If you're in combat, you might find yourself forced to share it at a later date, but there's a lot of downtime stuff that we won't necessarily roleplay. I've come to calling it kind of the fireside chats, of where you would share a lot of things, and repeating stuff that I say to your character comes down to, do you want to repeat all of it? And that way everybody can just hear what I said to you. Do you want to repeat something particular? And that way you can try to hide some information from the characters. But again, you're hiding it from the characters, not from the players. There are only a few rare instances where I will have stuff that is effectively hidden from the other characters. And that's not to like pull the wool over their eyes. It's more to force you to kind of role play the situation. And again, Justin is well aware of this, to role play the situation where you have to kind of like influence people, like, I'm in danger, I need your help, we have to do this. And those things can make for some really awesome role play inside of the group. But it's not to like laugh in somebody's face. And I think that's the big difference there. And I think it's kind of included in what I've already said, but another game theme is effectively your actions will have consequences. Every choice that you make, I think, and I think my players who have played with me in the past will attest to, I think where I excel most at is my encounters, my sessions, my stories are gray. You guys might have a big, bad, evil person that you are going up against, and it is clear that they are evil. And then you meet them, and they are filled with endearing characteristics. They are filled with that issue of, do the ends justify the means? This person's doing some evil shit for good reasons. Or they're doing some evil stuff to things that might be bad on their own right. I always try to create a very gray situation that makes you all have to make very big moral choices. And the ends justifying the means is the perfect way to kind of reference that. But by and large, I want situations to be difficult to decide. I want the group to try to like navigate their way between what is the right choice for us to make. Those are kind of the big things on like my general setting. Does anybody have any questions about those game dynamics? It's good. I see you open, but I didn't hear anything from you. Do you have any thoughts? Gotcha. Yeah, we can treat with a lot of that afterwards as well to try to figure out what the issue may be. I definitely feel like there's a lot of potential for issues too, so on how the voice chat works. And I know it might be as simple as also just restarting Discord. I'm not sure how glitchy it is as an app, but I know anytime you are having sound issues with Discord, one of the best ways to fix it is to turn Discord off. Sometimes just rebooting your computer, but often just turning Discord off and rebooting Discord is enough that it fixes sound issues. Good old days. So the next big thing is the group dynamics. We've kind of treated with all of these things. I want the game to be beginner friendly. It is likely to be a level 1 through 5 campaign. It is likely to be about 4 to 6 months is the general commitment that I am hoping everybody is ready for. And then it's one of those things where if I always will try to keep the group at 6 people. That's my ideal number. So if we have people leaving, I don't expect every table is not for every person. I understand that. I'm hoping that we can come out with 6 players from session 0 here, and that we can keep a 6-player group. If people start to drop, it kind of happens. Some campaigns are more difficult than others to get people to buy into replacing other players. Some people don't specifically want to replace other people in a campaign that's already started. But the continuance of a campaign depends a lot on the group when we get to that point. I will try to bring up when we're getting close to the end of the campaign that out of character we should decide where we want to go forward. I often have plot hooks inside of the game that determine a lot of those things, but I like to also make it clear as the actual humans behind the game that, like, right now you guys are biting this hook and it's going to take you towards this direction and it's going to give you this general continued campaign. And with a good group dynamic, I think anytime that we make it to the end of the starter campaign, it's pretty well expected that the group will actually be heading into the longer term campaign that would follow. But effectively, starting off here, this is where I say, like, the main idea of what I'm asking for people is to commit to about 4 to 6 months of play on a weekly basis, and it will be a 1 through 5 campaign. With that in mind, though, I'm also open to, again, discussing with the group where we might want to play, and we can kind of decide. But again, in general, I think 1 through 5 is the most fun place to play. You are not manipulating the world with high level abilities like some people might expect when they say fun, but it's where you are in the most danger. Once you hit 5th level, you have access to the most basic forms of regeneration, or not regeneration, but resurrection when somebody dies, and I think that changes the game a lot. Once you hit 5th level, you start to gain all of your class's abilities. You may not have all of the cool abilities that you want, but you have those core abilities that the class is built around. So that's part of why 5th level is kind of where we'll get to like a reassessment point. But 1 through 5, I think, is the most entertaining. And part of why I say have multiple characters in mind. I expect to kill at least one character inside of 1 through 5. I think it is very important for adventurers to see that there's a reason they get rich as hell, and it's because people who are stupid enough to go adventuring die. You might find out that your story tells one that's different, where people don't actually die, but that's one of those things. This is not going to be a happy, fluffy campaign. I create settings that are meant to be challenging. I create big battles that are meant to be challenging, that there's a certain level of, you should expect that death is always a possibility, because that means when you guys come out on top, it's going to be epic, and like it makes it more valuable that you came out with it. And that also goes for a lot of like the intrigue or like mystery aspects of things. I'm not going to make it easy for you. I just had a group who was kind of doing like a little bit of an investigation, and there were definitely times where I was like, I don't want to just give you all the information because I don't want to narrate a book to you all. I want you engaged. If you're not having fun with it, I can make it easier for you, but I don't want to tell you a story. I want you guys to write the story. So they were asking questions like this is almost verbatim. Do you remember that guy who did that thing and he did that other thing and he took that thing? And it's like, guys, you're not going to trick this person into yelling out their crime to you. Ask viable questions, not something that is clearly trying to lead them on. And actually, Benton is a lawyer, so I think it would be hilarious to get him in some of those questioning situations, because I feel like he might be able to get me to break down and actually have somebody admit some things. But the creativity aspect of a lot of stuff like that is what's really important. There's creative ways to have stuff happen, but there's also things where it's like very clearly, it's like a hollow trick that you're playing. And it's not that I don't want to give you an easy victory. It's that an easy victory doesn't have a lot of meaning. So when you guys have those things, easy victories will almost always be at a lower point after you've done some crazy hard stuff. There will be lower level stuff that just kind of comes easy. And the entire point there is to actually let the tension relax, so the story isn't always high stress, high stress, high stress. Because eventually, if it's always high stress, there's no stress left because you know you're always stressed. And that's kind of something I think that's very important to notice, that if something feels difficult and you're not having fun, you can let me know. But if it feels difficult, it's meant to be difficult to give you something more to feel proud of when you come out on top. So DM expectations. I will create a setting. I will create the environment. I try to have 3 to 6 encounters for any given session. I think about 3 encounters fills up about a 4-hour session pretty solid. In general, An encounter is not necessarily a battle. An encounter is not necessarily a conversation. If you come up on a thing in the wild or something that you might fight, if it has language, you can probably talk to it. You may not be able to come up with the right solution that will get it to stand down. You may not come up with the right situation that will get it to become friendly. But if something has language, it often has the intelligence to have a conversation that can avoid a combat that seemed inevitable. But that's kind of like a general idea there on how I'll design stuff, because I create everything, and the moment we go into the session, that's for you all to write the story. And I'll work on that setting, the environment, and then one of the other things I like to have is secrets. Secrets and clues that you might uncover wherever you might go, things that are nearby in case you do a U-turn and go where I don't expect. But in general, I am trying to write stuff before you enter the story and after the story, like after we finish the session. And that way I'm always reacting to you all. To me, this game is all about improvisation. I try to write character qualities about my NPCs, so everything that we play in game, I'm improvising. If I say something and we kind of move along and you ask me what they said, I may not remember because I made it up on the spot when I responded to you. And in general, that's like a lot of how I create the dynamic world that is reactive to your choices. I am another player at this table. I am trying to cooperate with you. I am not trying to be an antagonist. If you ever feel that I'm not being cooperative and being antagonistic, that's again where we have to communicate. Please share it with me. Let me know your concerns so we can try to find what the correct solution moving forward will end up being. That kind of falls back also into I'm always trying to challenge you all and make things difficult, but not impossible. There are certainly situations where you might go after a creature that you are not meant to fight. I might have some clues that are around to tell you, run away, don't move forward, don't try to fight this thing. But that doesn't always mean that you're always going to pick it up. But in general, if I wanted to kill you all, I can kill any of your characters whenever I want. It's not difficult to kill characters as a DM. It is difficult to try to challenge you and to make things dangerous. If you are trying to sleep and rest all the time, I am only going to make more difficult encounters, because if you have all of your resources and you're only having one encounter a day, I have to throw a deadly encounter at you, or you will never have a challenge. It will get very easy if you rest on a regular basis. Things get easier as I soak up your, I'm trying to think of the word, your resources. Yeah, in general, if I'm going to kill you, it's because you've made poor decisions and put yourself in a dangerous situation, and that can kill a character pretty easily, or that the dice came up and killed you. Most of the time, if I kill you because I made a mistake, I'm probably going to create something narratively that keeps you alive. I don't want to kill people because I made a mistake. I've done that in the past where I've designed encounters to to really like bring up like a paladin who's been having a tough time. So I threw a creature at the group that had like a crazy save, and then the paladin didn't show up, and I killed the barbarian like in an instant. And I was like, yeah, I took out 3 of those creatures, and you guys only fought 1 of the 4 that I thought I was going to throw at you. That was my mistake on that encounter. I had an NPC who was in their party that they had saved earlier in the campaign. That NPC became a cleric and resurrected her. If I kill you and it's my fault, I'm probably going to find a narrative reason to save you, because I want you to die because you made a bad choice, or I want you to die because the dice said so, not because the situation was unwinnable. There's definitely times where I've started to roll dice again on the actual tabletop, because I fudge a lot of crits to try to save players. And I feel like that actually, um, as much as it is nice to like not kill players because you get a crit at the end of a battle or towards the end of a battle, um, there's definitely situations where I've like saved players because they're the player who always dies type of thing. And I think it might have been the right choice, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was still like the right way to do it. So I've gotten back to rolling my dice like very much in the open, so people just know. Um, but that doesn't mean that I want you all to make meta choices based on what you see my dice rolls at. It's one of those difficult things to find the actual balance of players knowing everything and not killing somebody for making a bad choice. And I think the last thing is if there's ever a question of rules, I'm going to make it up. If I ever answer about a rule, that is the rule. We are going to move forward with the narrative. If you want to discuss a rule, we can discuss things out of session. You can use your time in session to grab a citation of the rule and send that to me on Discord. It doesn't mean that I'm going to change it. It means that in the future, I might act on it properly. But I have a pretty good concept of all of the rules of 5th edition. It doesn't mean that they always come to mind when I need them. I have a lot of things referenced in my actual note software. Like if you have a set group of spells, I have all of your spells in my notes so I can quick reference them. If you have a pretty set group from like a holy spellcaster or somebody like a druid who can use all of the spells, I try to have your main spells all set. I try to be on top of rules, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to come across something that I don't know, and I'm sure as hell not going to say, all right, I have to look up this rule. We're just going to sit here for 15 minutes while I'm looking for the rule. Nope, I'm going to make a decision and we're going to move forward with it. It's not to be argued with. If you have issues with rules, we can talk about it when it's not on everybody's time. You can send me citations, and like during a break, I might look over it and actually be like, all right, word, yep, I was definitely off on that ruling. Going forward, we're going to do this. And play more properly as the rules are presented. But by and large, when rules are presented in game, it's not meant to be argued. Often, if I'm doing something to bend a rule, it's to make the narrative more interesting. Often, if I'm doing something that is clearly not a part of the rules, it's because I have a homebrew rule in my mind that has never been homebrewed. Like, it's just a part of the game, but to me, that's just like it's saved in the wrong memory file. But yeah, it's not really something that we're here to debate in game about rules. That is a negative connotation to the rules lawyer, and we will soon talk about a positive connotation to the rule lawyer. Any thoughts on DM expectations? There are a lot of different qualities that make a bard, and not all of them are singing. I do want you to have some form of what you are doing. You have to have something in mind to flavor those things. But that's something, I don't know if I've necessarily treated with it, but there's a certain level of, like in my questionnaire, we've got the idea of what do you care about with the pillars? To me, the moment we start the session, we are role-playing. Role-playing is playing the game. You should be in character from the moment we start to the moment we finish. That doesn't mean that you have to speak with a voice. That is role-playing with a voice. It does mean, though, that on some level, like, your bard should still be a creative character. They can be a musical character, but they play essentially like acoustic. Or they can be like William Shakespeare is one of the best bards ever known, and I've never heard anything about his singing abilities. I'm sure he had them, but in the long run, like, if you can come up with quips, you can be like essentially like an author type of bard. If you want to just describe like I played a violin bard at one point where I would just tell people like, as we're walking into a situation, I'm like, I start to play an A chord. So it's like a really high screeching note. And like, as we're like sneaking into this dungeon, I'm like, and everybody would just know that if we've got a sneak, my bard's probably going to be trolling the party, playing some high ass chords that are just not sneaky. There's a lot of different ways that you can play your character. You can narrate stuff just as much as you can speak from in person. To me, the biggest thing is on some level, a bard should have ideas of what you're doing. If you're going to use, I'm trying to think of the cantrip that like you psych people out, you basically have, yeah, Vicious Mockery. If you're using Vicious Mockery, I want you to have some concept of like, I'll ask, what are you saying to the skeleton as you use Vicious Mockery? And like, and that's exactly it. I I just want something creative from you for those things. The biggest thing with a bard, though, is on some level, you have to focus some kind of creativity into that character and how they effectively are like mind fucking other people on a regular basis. And the opposite of that is they're like bolstering their friends with the opposite of mind fuckery, which is still mind fuckery. But that's kind of what a bard is like that creative person who is either bolstering or breaking people down. And on some level, they have that creative aspect. But it can be referenced in like, I wrote this little quip for you. And then you can, say to me, I then read to them the quip where I make fun of how their bones look like two left feet. You don't even have to say the saying. You can just describe what you kind of say to them. But that's generally how I interpret stuff, is like, I want you to be as creative as possible. Yeah, I've seen that thing referenced quite regularly. There's definitely a lot of stuff like that if you want to actually look for generators. One of my players, he played a bard for like a kind of like a two-shot that we did as we went into an endgame dungeon, and everybody in the group loved his bard, but he like often is painting essentially inside of our sessions. So he's sitting there painting and he's like, yeah, every single moment that I used one, like I said something with my bard, I spent the rest of the time that I was being silent trying to think of creative shit, and I got no work done today. So he was like, I can never play a bard full time because that's what he does. He works while he's playing D&D. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense, but that's also why everybody loved your bard so much. So the next thought goes into what we just kind of touched there, is player expectations. I've said it multiple times. I don't feel bad beating the dead horse with this. Creativity. The more creative you are, the better things are going to work out. One of my favorite things from, can't think of the name offhand, but the Rick and Morty guys D&D stream, is I love how the DM would listen to what a player says they want to do, and his response is, that happens. I want you all to be creative. There's a lot of stuff that the rules say you can do, but throw that shit out the window sometimes and be creative. The creativity is one of the biggest things about this game. All of the books start off telling the DM, like, don't forget, you make up all of the rules as you go. Make the rules serve you. And I want you all to remember that the rules serve you as well. I don't mind throwing rules out of the window to reward creativity. It doesn't mean that it is going to become the norm, but it does mean that sometimes a creative solution is the correct solution. And that includes, like, on a very basic note, if somebody yells out, insight check, when I'm talking with an NPC, you're going to get a high DC. You can roll an insight check, but it's going to be hard to figure out what's going on. If you tell me, they seem like they're lying. Are they lying? Can I roll an insight check? That tells me at least some level of what you're expecting. It lowers the DC. But if you tell me, feel like they're twisting something here. Can I watch their eyes? Do I see anything about how their face? Are they blushing as they say this? Are their eyes shifting from side to side? The more descriptive you are about what you are trying to do, the more I can narrow down where your brain is focused, and I can make that DC lower, because that DC is very particular to what you're describing, rather than if you just yell, "Can I investigate for traps inside of this room?" I'll have a high-ass DC for you to find the trap if there's a trap in that room. If you tell me that I am looking for traps on the door, that lowers the DC. If you tell me that I'm looking for a pressure plate in front of this door, that's going to lower the DC more, because you're only going to find a pressure plate. But if there's a pressure plate, you're pretty much going to find it. So those are the kinds of things, like, your creativity matters. And also your creativity tells me where the focus of your character's brain is at, and it lowers DCs to get closer to what you're specifically describing. I want players to be the masters of their characters. That means for me that for a lot of purposes, I'm going to trust that you are not cheating, but that doesn't mean that I don't ever look over stuff in hindsight to see if you are not cheating. I like D&D Beyond because I save PDFs of characters on a regular basis. It's really good for offline play because we can save the PDFs and actually play without electronics. I don't like the distractions of electronics, but we're playing online, so we can't get away from that entirely. But master your characters. I like to suggest always kind of have an idea of what you'll be doing for your next level. I'm trying to get a habit of telling people when they're getting close to their level, so they can start to plan it. But I would think it's best to always plan your next level. So if you hit a milestone or something that tells me it's time for them to level, you're ready to level, because I do want to move forward with the idea of actually rolling for hit points with the whole group together, and describing some of the basic things that the group is about to get as they level. So, like, just describing little things. As we hit level 2, I think his name was Orman, the wizard is going to gain his wizarding school, and he will start to learn the ways of the Ori, and as he starts to divine the future, will gain his ability to manipulate 2 dice on any given day. So there's certain levels of I want to actually be a group as we level up instead of having you level between sessions. It doesn't mean you may have to make all of the decisions, though. But that's where I'd like to say, in the long run, try to stay a level ahead, at least imagining what you might do. So maybe something comes up where you decide you want to multi-class instead of go for the next level. But that would be like the exception, not the rule. But in general, mastering your character also means a lot more things. I know a few of the players who are kind of returning are more hesitant to go towards spellcasters, because by and large, mastering your character also means that if you're going to rock a spellcaster, you've got to have a pretty good concept of a lot of spells. And it's one of the things, there are more forgiving spellcasters, there are less forgiving spellcasters. But we can discuss that in the future. I've already kind of hit it. Active participation and active communication. You guys have got to be a part of the session, because if everybody is silent, I am going to gain a lot of levels in frustration, and a frustrated DM is not a good DM. I need players who participate. That includes... It is indeed. There are a lot of ways to be good participating around each other. It means definitely making sure to let people speak when they're speaking, kind of thing. That's why I like the raised hand kind of idea. If somebody's not getting a chance to speak, I am going to actively call on that person who keeps hitting their push to talk, but they don't actually speak. But in general, I know 6 players who are all trying to participate at the same time. might seem like a lot, but it is clutch. If you're just being silent and letting things happen around you, it makes me feel bad about how things are playing out. I know there's a lot of people who are kind of voyeurs about they want to enjoy the game, and their enjoyment doesn't necessarily include them talking a whole lot. But by and large, communication is clutch. I don't have a story prepared to tell you all everything. I need you reacting to it. So there's a lot to say about the communication factor of what we're doing. If you don't feel comfortable in the group now, I understand. But again, pretend these people are your friends, because if we last as a campaign, these people are going to become your friends. And then the last thing on my player expectation list is, if you're going to miss a game, let me know. And let me know as soon as possible. Like I said, when I killed that barbarian, I created that encounter to make a paladin feel really good about a character that they were feeling bad about. And that paladin let me know, I think 10 minutes before the game, that they weren't going to show up. I forgot to alter the encounter. There's a lot of stuff about I create stuff for the group, and I often am creating stuff to let characters shine. There's two different ways of challenging people. Attacking your strengths and attacking your weaknesses. I am not going to attack your weaknesses often. Most of the time, I'm going to attack your strengths. The problem with that is if I attack somebody's strength who is not there, it's very likely that it's the rest of the group's weakness. And I might do bad things because I didn't actually modify something for when somebody didn't show up. Besides the fact that it's extremely frustrating having less than 6 people when I'm planning on having 6 adventurers. But any thoughts on player expectation? Hey, in general, like sending me like information on when you miss. Discord is my main communication. I pretty much always have Discord open while I am working, or at least get the notifications pretty quickly. Roll20 is possibly the worst place to try to communicate with me, because though I'm there probably once a day at any given point, just because I'm on Roll20 does not mean that I'm noticing its messages. And then one thing that I've like offered people as far as like the RPG consent idea goes is I'm open to giving somebody my phone number if they wanted to have like a different kind of communication, to be weary of things that are like a yellow or like a soft or a hard pass on topics. But by and large, I would say Roll20 is the best source. Like, just as a thought here, my D&D setup is 3 screens. I have the virtual tabletop in front of me. I have a list of all of my notes on my right screen, and that often includes the actual manual that we're kind of running from, but like reference material on my right screen. And then my left screen is like a document file is the wrong thing, like an Excel file with all of your characters' names, your general like important stats like your AC, your spell DC, your investigations, your feats. Like I've got character information, Discord, and my recording information that also gives me like Twitch info. So I've got a lot of stuff in front of me, but the Discord one is one that I try to look at regularly, because that's where I look to see if somebody's like, again, like the raising their hand idea. So in general, Discord's the way to contact me, but by and large, if you need like a different form of contact, just let me know. But again, the biggest thing about missing stuff is effectively like a no call, no show, just like going to work. No call, no show is really, really annoying. If you miss one session, I may not really do much. If you miss 2 in a row, I am already trying to replace you. So I have 2 players right now who they didn't contact me for 3 weeks, basically. And the one's like, No, I really want to play. I love tabletop gaming. I'm like, you don't really tell me that when you're just silently missing for 2 weeks or for 3 weeks. And then the other one finally responded and said, "Yep, I've got a lot of family stuff going on right now." And I get that because I know he's got a daughter and he like missed there. But it's one of those things where take the time to let me know. Because if I replaced those players and they came back, I'm not sure that I wouldn't just say, yeah, you lost your seat at the table. Because fact of the matter is this is my business at this point. To not have players means that I'm losing money that I effectively have replaced other work with. So, yeah, just try to let me know with as much time ahead as possible. Um, so combat wise, I think that's something important to kind of treat with. There's a lot of things about combat where we have to kind of get into just as we get there, but I do want people to understand that idea of the fireside chats. You should have some general idea of how the party strategizes for different combats, so you don't necessarily have to role play situations where, like, if you guys are going to fight a dragon, I expect you all at some point were sitting down by a fire preparing dinner, talking about how you would fight a dragon. When you walk into and start to see qualities of this dragon, you don't have that stuff. So that wouldn't be stuff that you would have already like pre-strategized on. But there's a certain level of, and I have to work on this as well, of taking time that when a combat is starting, giving the players time to actually strategize. And that's where you guys have to find that balance of non-meta conversation and meta conversation. The more generalized your strategy is, the less likely that it's ever going to touch into meta. If you start to talk about the actual qualities of the creature that you are just now seeing, you don't have time to have that strategy because you just saw those qualities. You definitely didn't see them last night when you were preparing for this. And that kind of folds into, like, once I throw the initiative counter up there, like, when you guys have a conversation, you have 6 seconds on your turn to say stuff. This is most pertinent, in my opinion, with the idea that if you try to get somebody to surrender, and there are 5 of your players between when you say this and when that creature takes its turn, that creature can't respond to you until 5 people go. So if those people don't follow suit with you offering that person amnesty or telling them to surrender or this or that or the other, a lot of stuff can change with 5 people between you and that creature. But in general, my NPCs will only respond on their initiative order. And that goes for the same way as if they tell you to surrender. I'm going to go through the whole round of initiative. And you should be able to count on, if a creature tells you to surrender, it's also holding an action. So if somebody decides to continue the fight, every creature between that one telling you to surrender who doesn't do something, probably holding an action to kill people. So be weary about when we get to those situations where if you guys are offering something to surrender just as much as if I am offering it to you guys, death is on the line. But those are kind of like big things there. I don't want to cut back on your communication, but I do want the players to understand there's a difference of what the players know and what your characters know. Try not to ruin the experience for players who might not know something. There's some really cool creative situations that can come up in game that lose a lot of the fun after you've experienced it once. So if you kind of know something, don't go straight for something's weakness because you, the player, know about it. You're often ruining a lot of fun for you to play off that tough situation just as much as you might be ruining it for somebody who's never encountered it and they truly are blissfully ignorant. But there's a lot to meta stuff hurts players more than it hurts me. you might disarm an encounter by using some meta knowledge, but you're definitely, in my opinion, definitely hurting any players who did not have that meta knowledge. So stuff like that, it's you kind of really have to watch out for, because it's really easy to see a creature attack its weakness and just assume that your character knew about that weakness. In my opinion, and how I treat stuff like that, is I like to create characters who know a lot of stuff, and that way I can go to the DM and, I'm a scribe. I've been going through books my entire life, copying this and writing down that, and absorbing some of that information. Do I know anything about this creature? I don't name the creature. I try to describe stuff as a DM without using its name, because I want to describe the creature, not to tell you what it is. And I will slip. I will tell creatures' names at times, and it is very much an accident. But even using creatures' names kind of gives up a lot of that like mystery that makes stuff fun. But like with the scribe idea, I'll ask my DM, what might I know about this? They let me roll a die, and that's the type of thing where it determines how much information the DM Jared can add to the character Mara, and then Mara can react on. And that to me is vastly preferable to somebody who has experience, knows like monster manual stuff, and will then react on it. If you come up on a creature for the first time and you go straight for his weakness, I guarantee you, I am going to create monsters from then on out. It's not a question of, is this fun or not? I am going to stop using monster manual creatures as much as possible, because it is annoying to me when somebody goes straight for a creature's weakness the first time that character has ever come across it. You either ask so we can give you an intelligence roll, or you make that choice, and you might find that every creature you come across from then on out is homebrewed. And that creates a lot more work for me, but it also protects people who don't read the monster manual for fun. Still sounds dead, Skid? So assuming that was just a comm test, that's kind of the end of what I would consider the social contract. The next thought I have here is something that I call the player roles, that I like to suggest is the type of things that people can kind of pick up as the players in the campaign. One second, I have to cough. This is not like character roles, these are player roles. So for instance, the caller is somebody who, when you guys kind of go into a group huddle, I will often be working on something else, which means my attention is not on listening to you all. And I want somebody who I am basically I will almost always respond once you guys come to a decision with, okay, what's your decision? And my point of that is regardless of whether I was listening or not, with a moment of forethought, does everybody still agree to that thought? And among those things, it means, in the best of times, it means there's one person who does that for me, who you guys have a conversation, and then they will repeat basically the plan going ahead. And once everybody agrees to that, then I can ask that person and they can repeat that exact same thing to me. Effectively, the caller is not really a group leader, but they are somebody who relays the group consensus to me when it's time to tell me what the group is actually doing. That's one of the roles. The next one that I consider is the treasurer. This is effectively somebody who works a lot of the actual loot related stuff. Under the handout, I have the party loot. I want you to use the party loot and then clear it. If you guys pick up 40,000 gold pieces, you can write down 40,000 gold pieces. At some point, you need to distribute it, and I want you to distribute it at the end of sessions. I don't want you to have a list that continues on for all time. Justin knows at least a little bit about how his other group, it frustrates the hell out of me to look at that party loot list, because it is a record of every single session. There's a party notes directly below, and they keep the party notes in the loot list as far as I'm concerned. It is annoying as hell. Well, again, that's one of those things, like, it gets out of hand as part of the problem, and then it makes it an actual, like, large thing to encounter. But effectively, I want you all to recognize that the party should work as a single unit. You guys are the star of this story. The six are the star of this story. And part of what the party loot list is meant to be is it's meant to be like, we don't have to stop every single moment to determine where every single thing goes. But if things do not get distributed to characters, I don't have a proper understanding of the resources that the group has access to. If you get a healing potion, you have got to understand a healing potion is a very big resource. Those are the type of things that if you start to collect 20 healing potions, that tells me I am not creating challenging situations. If you constantly have 0 healing potions, it means that maybe I'm creating too challenging of situations. And to have 95 million places to look to find all of your resources is a failure. It should be, I can look at your characters to figure stuff out. At very least, the party loot list should represent, once somebody gets a bag of holding, that you can have stuff like that. But by and large, to me, the party loot list was meant to... I've got one group where they have, I think, 15 magical items, and one character has 8 magical items. That is a failure in the complete opposite end of the spectrum. That person has hoarded magical items and chosen not to share a lot of things. And that's like exactly why I wanted to create the party loot list, is for people to understand this is what we found. Let's take some downtime where we're kicking it in the tavern at the end of this session, and everybody's drinking and like enjoying their like role play, and actually divvy up some of this loot. So yeah, like the treasure is definitely one thing, and that idea is basically somebody who manages the party loot list, but also makes sure that they take the time as the group to be like, all right, everybody, we found this magic item, this magical potion, this potion, and this amount of coins. Let's divvy them up. And basically clear it between sessions. One of the next things is kind of a bookkeeper. It's effectively somebody who keeps track of like food resources, material resources, and like kind of sidekick stuff and whatnot. By and large, I think that's mostly campaign dependent, because I don't necessarily care to have a lot of bookkeeping stuff. I leave a lot of resource management like that up to players to kind of decide. If you're leaving your town for a expedition, I think you guys should take the time to actually buy stuff like that. If you are leaving town and then I look on your characters and nobody has rations, that's insane. You're going to start starving. But there's certain levels of the bookkeeper is possibly the least important of what I'll go over here. Chronicler is effectively somebody who takes notes and is kind of the memory of the party. Again, that is a player, not a character. If your character is a note taker, that's awesome. I often create characters who are, because I myself am a note taker. One of my campaigns, I created an actual leather-bound book to be my notes, and I constantly describe my characters having the book out and writing down notes. So when we went through, well, it also gets into one of the next ones, which I consider the cartographer, but like when we would go through different dungeons and places, I would share with the party at the end of the thing. I'm like, while we're sitting around a campfire tonight, I'm going to show everybody the maps that I've drawn, so we can kind of have that idea of this is where we've explored inside of this place, and people could actually see. It's my interpretation of it. I like the inaccuracies that come up with it, but those are two really clutch, in my opinion, characters, player traits. Is somebody who's a note taker and kind of memory that other people can, if somebody asks something about historically where the party's gone, I will often sit silent and wait for another player to have an answer to that. If it comes down to it where I'm going to give you that information, I might hide it behind a dice roll to see whether you can actually remember something that I am remembering for you. But notes to me is an important quality, and a cartographer who actually draws places that you've been is another thing that I think is very important. But those are two different player roles, in my opinion. Another one is the NPC tracker. It's a very similar situation. Basically track interactions and how the parties kind of dealt with some of the NPCs around. So those three are kind of like a split of, these are memories of the party. And then the last one is what I call the positive connotation rules lawyer. This is that same idea that, like, if I say, all right, we're going to play grappling like this, but if anybody has a moment to actually bring up the grappling information and send that to me, when I say citation, I mean if you can tell me the page in the PHB so I can look it up on my PDF, if you can send me like a picture of that section from the PHB, all of this on Discord, like it's not meant to bother the actual flow of the game, that is a positive connotation of a rules lawyer. When I ask for a rules clarification, we will still move on, but it gives me that access of somebody who is effectively still listening can look up and find the solution to the problem. So, an hour and 45 minutes in. Does anybody have anything that they think should be added to the social contract? Does anybody have any thoughts if we move forward towards a campaign? Do you have any thoughts on what you would like to play, what kind of adventures, where you'd like to play? Do you want me to just choose? What kind of thoughts do we have as far as the campaign selection? I describe my general style, especially off from the beginning, as running published modules as scaffolding from which we will play. Again, your choices matter, so the moment we start playing, we're going to diverge from the actual campaign. But by and large, my question is like, do you want to fight undead constantly? We can play an undead campaign. Do you want to explore the icy, do you want to have like a survival campaign in the ice of the north? We can play that. I would say at this point, I know what I will play if nobody has an opinion, what I will run for you. Phandalin is one of my favorite towns. It has a lot of variants. Justin's played in the campaign, and I can tell you it won't be the same campaign even if we chose to play the same campaign. But one of the things is there are many different ways that we can start a campaign. But effectively, I have no interest in creating a homebrew world. There's a whole lot of wasted time for stuff that most players do not care about the lore. I think homebrewing a world is absolutely a waste of time, and not to be like insulting of anybody who might have done it, I think it's idiotic. As far as things go, Ed Greenwood has created the Forgotten Realms, and the moment I start running it, I have my Forgotten Realms, which has some to do with his, but otherwise has nothing to do with his. So, for what it's worth, we're going to play in the Forgotten Realms. If things move away from that, that is perfectly fine. But by and large, I think the scaffolding of starting in the Forgotten Realms is the right choice. And more particularly, having a low-level campaign that is effectively a frontier town outside of like the main bastions of civilization is also the right place to start. But that's where I'm asking like what campaigns you all might want to start or might want to play, because there are other options. Ghosts of Saltmarsh is one of the like anthologies that they have. So there's a lot of like quests that can be plugged in from other places. But otherwise, part of the problem with Ghosts of Saltmarsh is that it's not necessarily a cohesive campaign, but it's something that you can pull from. And that's, I would say, if you guys want to play a water campaign, there's viable options that we could do something like that. So low level 1 through 5 is where survival and exploration are certainly more dangerous, and they kind of get to be a bit of a moot point as you start to level up higher than that. but that might be one of those things where there are higher level campaigns that certainly still test those things versus other ones where it almost gets thrown out of the window as you pretty much a lot of threats get really very much solved as you get too high of level to where that's kind of the conversation we already had though, where a lot of stuff starts to not be dangerous as you're doing those explorative or survival moments. But there is a particular campaign that I think they've got two campaigns that kind of sit pretty steady in that survival kind of idea. That is golden. So if those are the big thoughts on what people think about a campaign, I think that gives a pretty solid idea of what maybe we can do. Um, yeah, we can kind of move forward with those two thoughts. That maybe something water related and maybe something survival related would be kind of ideal there. So what sort of stats do you all like? Does everybody want to roll? Do you guys want to do a point buy? What kind of thoughts do you all have on that? The only roll that I offer does not have you all rolling your own stats. The roll idea again is that each one of you would roll 46 and lose the lowest, giving you a score between 3 and 18, and that would be one of the 6 that we use. In general, I will essentially roll 2 myself, so we'll have you each roll one of the 5 stats, and I will roll 2, and then we will drop the second to lowest. We will keep the 5 highest and the lowest. But that's kind of the choice. Like, if we go to roll, it's going to be roll. If we go to point buy, it's going to be point buy. There's no seeing the stats and then switching over. Point buy is safe. Yeah, the last time we generated the stats, we came up with 1 stat higher than the standard array. It was 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10. Oh yeah, 100%. Well, it's actually better to roll the 4d6. You are statistically probably going to get a higher roll based on the 4d6 dropping 1, even without the idea that I dropped the second to lowest instead of the lowest of those 7 stats. The probability definitely lends towards that, but point buy, you are limited to a 15 as your highest stat. With the rolled dice, you can still get 16s, 17s, and 18s. The biggest thing about how I want to roll is that there is not going to be a person with a different, like, super low stats and one person with super high stats. Everybody is going to have the same stats. If you guys got all 10s, that would be absurd. It's viable, but it would be absurd. It's protecting one person against having really bad rolls. I've played in games before where I think I had a character who had a total of like 62 stats. And there was a player who had close to, I think, 89 or 93. They had 3 18s. The DM had to throw approximately 3/4 of the encounter at this one character and the other quarter at the other 5 players. And if at any given point that person went down, it was a party wipe. There was no question to it. You either couldn't challenge that player, or you couldn't challenge the group, or the group wiped. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like to have individual rolled stats. If the party's going to roll stats, I think the party should roll and share stats. Point buy is a little different. Like, point buy allows you to buy the standard array. The difference is, though, is point buy is 27 points, which is essentially like varying from a 10. You can gain points by taking an 8 is like -2, or it gives you 2 more points. Taking a 15, I think, is 9 points. I think I'm saying that wrong, because I feel like you have to take an 8 to get a 15. but it's effectively like point buy allows everybody to have effectively the same stats. It just means that some people might actually have negative stats so they can have higher stats, whereas like the very base stats that you can take, you could be like very middle of the ground with like I think all 13s, or you could be 15 8 15 8 15 8. Yep. So like my Fright Night game, my Fright Night game, they rolled in session 0. Damn, clicking with shift is such a. So no, I just can't do stuff while I'm pressing my push to talk. So my Fright Night game rolled in session 0. Effectively, one player rolled each of these stats. But this, damn, the shift. But the stats that they rolled, shift. It's the best one that I've ever found. Press to talk sucks, but it's better than hearing people sneeze and cough. Yep. Alt has zoom issues when I'm in the virtual tabletop, so I can't use it. That's why I say there's no good solution to this, but I move forward. I soldier on. So that's the array that they rolled, and effectively what that means is like Maddie might have rolled a 16, Justin might have rolled a 14, I might have rolled a 13, Fenton might have rolled a 12, Beakus might have rolled an 11, and Skid might have rolled a 10. But everybody shares those same 6 stats. And that way, nobody has absurdly high stats, nobody has absurdly low stats. And again, I think the biggest thing, that might actually be 3 points above what the standard array gives you. Because I think the standard array basically has like an 8, maybe the 11 is a 10, and the 16 is a 15. That's like, in the long run, I'm okay with you all choosing the standard array. It sounds like the group wants to do that, but I do want to share with you that the reason that I want to stress the dice roll is this game is all about dice. There's a reason my channel is The Dice Never Lie. You are probably going to get better stats by rolling. And that's also even before we do the 4d6 dropping the lowest. The fact of the matter is you're probably better off with the stats if you roll 3d6 and just take those. But that is the option. Once you all decide, we can move on from it. But I'm just going to say the stats, rolling for the stats is better unless you roll lower. Right up until you roll, the probability is that you will get better stats by rolling for them. Yeah, I think I have Avray banned from actually talking in the group chat right now. So this might actually pop up in character creation, but we will see where this comes up. Yeah, and that's the important part about how I roll it. Yeah, Avray won't even respond to me like that. I have to change how I have it prepared because she messaged it to me. But yeah, the part of what I think is best about that roll is that every person gets a single stat roll in what is a pretty traditional roll. Like 46 dropping the lowest is pretty traditional at this point in D&D. And every person would do that once. And we would share 6 of those stats from 7 stats being rolled. My importance of saying that I'm going to end up rolling 2 here is because 1, normally 6 is my minimum, and that just so happens to be that we have 6 stats. But I also think it's important to have a low stat because those are the funny ones. I absolutely love doing the shit that you're not good at and having hilarious situations come from it. It's one of the reasons I think the dice are so amazing in this game, is that there's a lot of characteristics that you can try to be funny in a game, and you can do stuff that you know that you're like struggling uphill. And I think doing stuff that you know is struggling uphill is where you will come across genuinely funny stuff rather than trying to be funny. I think often we try too hard to do stuff. So trying to be funny, I don't think ends up being funny often. Whereas doing stuff where it's like a genuine struggle makes for some pretty hilarious situations. Inside of Roll20, I believe it's going to be \R and then 46KH3. So yeah, that would be a 13. Yeah, again, I think the average of 46 dropping the lowest is 13.5. Which costs 5 points out of the point buy, and the standard array is what? I think standard array is 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 8. I am perfectly fine with you guys having made that decision, but what I was trying to stress is that the average is better by rolling the dice. So you guys can go with point buy, and that is fine because it did sound like most people wanted to, but I wanted to make sure that you all knew that up until you roll those dice, the average will give you better stats by rolling them. You cut out after just... Yeah, so Fenton, that roll that you just rolled 46, that's... You don't necessarily have to have the whole macro to understand that you're subtracting the lowest there. Well, I think what you're missing in those other rolls is that it's 4d6 KH3, which is keep high 3. So technically, like, while I say it, you drop the lowest, the way to roll with most of these bots is to roll and keep the highest 3. So let's throw it out there again, and I feel like the best way to now do this is to actually say in the Discord chat, do you want to roll or do you want to do point buy? And just give me that information now. It's going to be a group consensus. It's going to be 3 people, one way or another, who are going to choose for the whole group. Well, it's going to be for the whole campaign, though. So you can make that decision. And right now it'll be 2 for point buy. I believe Skid said he was going for, so I think it's on Maddie. So I would say everybody can go through character creation under point buy. Before you all jump too far into this, I have another minor question that will be one of the last things that is effectively me taking part in a lot of this. Is that, does anybody have any racial or cultural limits on what character races are basically viable? In general, I have it accessible to... Oh man, I think I've got like 5 books of classes there, and that I would just note that, again, I have a predominantly human world, so if you choose different classes, or races, there's going to be differences there, but by and large, effectively, you have access to pretty much anything. I would just want you to keep in mind that, like, if you take a race like elves and you join a group of humans, I need you to have a backstory reason why your elf, who can live for hundreds of years, is hanging out with people who live for such a short time. So there's a certain level of, like, your character background and, like, what you are has to fit into the idea of adventuring there. But do you all care for any racial or cultural limits on what races can be used? All rogues are still skill monkeys, though. There's only so much he could avoid being good at almost anything, like as far as skills go. No, it is the Blood Hunter. It's Matt Mercer's creation. I am 100% behind that. I do not think you should play something based on what you think the party is going to be. Play what you want to play. One of the most important things that I would say is if people do not want to play somebody who has the ability to heal, take the fucking healer's feat. Carry medicine kits and use that healer's feat. Because one of the things is there's no way to predict that everybody who is here now is going to stay in the campaign. There's no way to predict where the party makeup will go in the long run. Justin's game has had 4 people who have been there the entire time, and 2 people who have basically cycled anywhere from like 1 to 2 sessions to 1 to 2 months. But like, I think in the 6 or 7 months we've been playing, that campaign has had 4 consistent people and 2 people who are like guest stars. So it's one of those things where I would say, like, play the class that you want to play. And if you guys end up with a group that is not like filled with anybody with healing abilities, take the healer's feat as soon as you can. Because one of the things is regardless of where you go, you can't out heal the damage that is coming at you. The life cleric is the one person who has a chance of out healing damage, but you cannot out heal the damage of how D&D is set up. The biggest thing a healer is meant to do is to bring the action economy back online, where if somebody goes down, especially if that person is like next up in initiative order, you want to get them back up on their feet. Because if they have 1 hit point, they are still inside of the action economy. But if they are down, when there's 5 actions on one side and 6 on the other side, you pretty much know statistically that the 6 actions are going to win that combat. And you need to even that and get it to your side as fast as possible. And that's also the strategy of kill the weak stuff as soon as possible. Throw the action economy into your favor as soon as possible. Focus fire. Yeah, life clerics are just the ones that heal the best. My cleric is my favorite class, but I will never play a life cleric. I like the other subclasses of clerics because they dabble in other classes' abilities. The light cleric has been my absolute favorite because I can still sling fireballs, and I slung fireballs. But when I need to heal, I can choose those spells and still have them. The biggest difference that's nice about a life cleric is that you always have the very most quintessential cleric spells prepared. You don't have to choose to prepare them, versus my life cleric or my light cleric always had damage dealing spells prepared. They just didn't have to choose to prepare them. So that's one of the things that varies like between the clerics. But in the long run, if you want to play a cleric, that is golden. A party is better off for having a dedicated class who can heal. But it doesn't mean that you have to. Yeah, I think I have Avray set up that you can't really roll in this area that very well. If you go into the character creation channel, you can roll those dice and she'll be able to speak. But yeah, like, play the class that you want to play. Healing is an aspect of the game that is not nearly as important as it once was. And that's in part because if you get hit with 24 damage and Justin has 23 hit points, he's going to 0. He's not going to -1. If he gets hit with 22 damage, he's still at 0. If he gets with 23, that kills him. So there's like that level of there's no 0. It's just if you hit somebody beyond their life into a negative that is equal to their maximum hit points, that's where it matters. But 1 hit point always gets somebody back up. And that's what brings the action economy back into form. Dead. Outright dead. If I hit you with 45 damage, you're just at 0. But if I hit you at 46, you're dead. Yeah. Well, it's also the thing, like, if Justin were at 1 hit point, 24 damage kills him. Because he has 23 hit points. And that's where that's where your maximum hit point matters. But in the long run, what I'm trying to say is that action economy is the biggest thing that will tell you whether you are going to win this encounter that is in combat. And healing only has to have you at 1 hit point for you to be able to like fight and use your action economy. Often, and this is probably a better way to say this, often the best way to heal is to prevent damage by killing monsters. If you kill a monster before it can attack, you have probably prevented more damage by killing that monster than by trying to heal the person that it's about to hit. Yeah, this is all brainstorming at this point, Maddie, so you are good to go whatever it takes to be safe. But if you want to go until power goes out, that's legit too. Fenton, did you have a chance to look at the Battlemaster Ranger or the Battlemaster War Fighter? Because that was the one I was saying. Like, if you want to be an archer, technically that fighter outclasses a ranger pretty regularly. So, so perhaps it might be best to assume Maddie's going to be the swashbuckler. It's not necessarily somebody who can soak up damage, but they are definitely good at dealing damage. I don't think we've gotten to what Justin's looking at. I like the idea of saying that Fenton is probably going towards an archer, maybe for you to decide whether you want to do a Battlemaster or an actual ranger. Because I'll definitely, like, that's obviously up to you. And then I feel like Beakus said you wanted to be a monk, and Skid was saying he's open to being a cleric. So I think at that point, you guys have a very solid 4 characters. And the question that I would kind of put out there to Justin is, have you started to entertain being a caster? Somebody with utility spells? Wizards are one of those classes to remember that their subclasses are something, but all wizards are pretty much equal in what they do. The biggest thing about being the evocation is you can usually drop a fireball and never have to worry about where you're placing it, because you can avoid hurting the people who you place it on top of. But like wizards are one of those things, like you can focus on what you want to focus on, but what that really comes down to is like most of their subclasses. Yep, I save half my gold on doing this. So wizard's definitely a funny class for how the subclasses work. But yeah. Yeah, there's definitely cool things that you can do with them. Um, I love playing bards. I love playing divination wizards. I like dice manipulation. Those are 2 things that are pretty clutch. I am pretty stoked to play a scribe wizard, because that's another one of those things. Like you can do a lot to manipulate the game to your powers, and that's a wizard to a T. Like I change the world. But you would definitely be the weakest, lowest hit point character in another group. That actually brings me to kind of how I treat backgrounds. You all are welcome to have pretty simple backgrounds. If you want your background to be a part of the story, you have to include it. If you are looking for your long-lost sister, you should be walking into taverns and asking me, I look around the tavern. Do I see any young girls who are about like 15 or 16 who have like red hair that might be my sister? And that's how you include your background, because I'm not necessarily just going to throw in your background information at any given point. But if your character's background is that you are searching for somebody, you better be searching for them. It's up to you to roleplay that background. So there's certain levels of like, I look at your backgrounds and I will use information from them. You should not skip over that area of character creation. Having information about how your character looks, their height, their weight, all of that stuff is important. You should do your flaws and all of those different things. You should have qualities of your character. But by and large, you're level 1s. You all are kind of commoners who have answered the call to action. You're not badasses. You are more badass than a lot of people who are out there in the world. And that's one of the differences of a level 1 adventure. Most commoners you could punch, and they're going to go unconscious and probably going to die. Whereas even a wizard is likely to be able to live through a punch or 2. Maybe, probably not 3. But that's one of those things to keep in mind, that your characters should not be a general who has led the Lord's Alliance for the last 37 years. No, not at all. You need to be a higher level character who's joining a campaign if you want to do something like that. I was talking to my brother. I feel like somebody who does something like that, that's kind of like a 5th level character. They're people who are badass. They command respect. But by and large, adventurers are the people who are starting to become something. They are more than commoners, but they are still very much weak people who are still very much walking a fine line in fatality. So there's a lot to being a level 1 character, but by and large, if you guys come up with backstory stuff, that's the kind of thing, like, I'll have it in mind, but I'm not necessarily going to include it on a regular basis. But the more you actually act that out in game, the more likely you are to actually have stuff like that actually occur. But I would not say that in a 1 through 5 campaign, in those starter level campaign, you're probably not necessarily going to have a family arc kind of thing play out. But I would try to have yourselves placed roughly in the north of the Sword Coast. I think what I'll do is probably start things out in Phandalin. And if you guys move towards the coast, you might be able to move into somewhere like Leyland, which will give you a little bit more sea kind of stuff. And if you move towards the spine of the world, we might be able to move into... damn, I can't think of the campaign. Let me turn around and look at my books. Icewind Dale, there we go. Icewind Dale is the other one that I think those two areas kind of sit well with with the little bits that you guys have thrown out there. And in general, again, like, running through Phandalin again is not going to be the same Phandalin you've been in Justin. So I think that's a good way for you all to start out, and it allows you to kind of play with things. Something like moving into the survival nature of Icewind Dale, there's a lot of things that can kill you, which is just kind of like going outside. Being next to the coast is pretty similar, but it gives you all a lot of viability to kind of choose the paths that you go on, and see how things play out. But I think we'll do something kind of like that. So if you guys create your characters that you're somewhere in the north, I think that's the best idea, or that you're from somewhere in the north, or that you've been traveling to the north and maybe gotten lost, lost your like traveling caravan on the Triboar Road, and Phandalin was the nearest place to find shelter. There's a lot of different ways where you guys can place yourselves there, but I think what we'll do is we'll start out with characters in Phandalin. So as you all start to create yourselves, feel free to bounce ideas off of me. Like, if Justin, you're trying to have gone from a family who had nothing to a lot and then lost it all again, and you've kind of invested what you can into like spell books and kind of playing around with magic, I think that's the type of thing where there's definitely cities where you might have been more likely to do that. So if you have an idea in mind or something where that comes in mind, we can kind of, essentially how I like to think of things is that, especially at this phase, we should be spitballing ideas back and forth. So as you start to think of something, try to have it generalized, throw the idea at me so I can listen to it and I can respond with some of the setting ideas that might affect those choices. And then that way you can kind of respond with, all right, I like that part of it, so I'm going to lean towards that, and it will fill in some of those generalities and get closer and closer to specifics.